In the early 1980s, terror descended upon New Jersey with the emergence of an infamous figure. Panicked people gave him the chilling nickname, the Thrill Killer, Richard Biegenwald, a serial killer who took the lives of 4 women and 2 men. His name is as repugnant as a symbol of horror. His violent acts bring nothing but fear and death. Delving into his troubled past is the only way to truly understand the workings of this demon. Biegenwald was born on August 24, 1940, in Rockland County, New York. The area is a beautiful natural environment and culturally diverse, making it a great place to visit and live. However, Biegenwald's upbringing was fraught with problems. His father was a heavy drinker and physically and verbally abused his mother when he was drunk. The house they lived in often had a depressing odor. The paint on the walls is also a little patchy in the dim light. In this family atmosphere, Biegenwald became very introverted and sensitive. When he was 5 years old, he was extremely curious. It was a sunny day, the leaves rustled in the breeze, and Biegenwald saw a match and felt an inexplicable urge. He lit the bed on fire and tried to walk into the flames, but his mother was able to control the fire. He was then beaten by his angry father and taken to the local psychiatric hospital in Rockland County. Here, Biegenwald began to be observed for mental conditions. At the age of 8, as he often saw his father smoking, drinking, and gambling, he began to take up these bad habits as well. Drunken men could often be seen staggering along the neighborhood streets, and noisy voices emanated from the smoke-filled taverns. In this environment, Biegenwald gradually lost himself. At the age of 9, his mother was so concerned about Biegenwald's mental health that he was admitted to Bellevue Hospital in New York. Located in the middle of a bustling city, the hospital's interior was bright and spacious, but smelled of disinfectant. Here, he underwent a series of electroshock treatments and was repeatedly shocked into a state of shock. After the shock therapy at the hospital, Biegenwald was sent by his family to the State Training School for Boys in Warwick, New York. This place focused on correcting the offending behavior and antisocial attitudes of underage males, with strict administration and harsh punishments. But his behavior didn't change in the slightest, and he continued to incite others to run away and steal property. By the time he returned home for the weekend, Biegenwald had stolen money that his mother had hidden in the house. Late at night, he would search the darkened streets for stray animals. The streets were cold and empty, with only the faint glow of dim streetlights. He abused these poor animals. At the age of 11, the situation became even worse. Biegenwald was still obsessed with arson, and he set fire to his house in an attempt to set himself on fire, but was once again prevented from doing so. At the age of 16, Biegenwald graduated from the State Training School for Boys in Warwick. He then went to high school, but because his bad habits persisted and the school discipline was too relaxed, he chose to drop out after only a few weeks. After dropping out, Biegenwald went to Nashville, Tennessee, where he did not settle down. He didn't want a regular job, so he got into the business of stealing cars. But it didn't last long, and he was arrested by federal agents while transporting a stolen car in Kentucky, forcing him to spend several months in a detention center. At the age of 18, in 1958, Biegenwald returned to his mother's house, and without much delay, he stole another car in the area and drove to Bayonne, New Jersey. On December 18, 1958, Bayonne, New Jersey was shrouded in a winter depression. With a cold wind and few pedestrians on the streets, the city seemed to be immersed in a quiet and slightly depressing atmosphere. On this seemingly normal day, a murder shocks the local community. Steven Sladowski, an American lawyer and grocery store owner born to Polish immigrants, is a well-known figure in the local community. A devout Catholic, he was often active in church and civic groups, both as a member of the Holy Name Society and the Democratic Club. He was seen as soft-spoken, smiling, and very kind. His presence was like a ray of warm sunshine in winter, bringing warmth and hope to those around him. However, one day, 18-year-old Richard Biegenwald and his accomplice Frank Sparnroth set their sights on the grocery store, driving a stolen cream-colored car that was quietly parked not far from the store. Sparnroth sat in the car, nervously watching the surroundings and waiting for the right moment. At that moment, the air around the grocery store seemed to freeze, with only the occasional whistling sound of the cold wind blowing through. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of a gunshot, and Biegenwald ran out of the store, his figure flashing in front of the store. his face full of panic. He jumped in his car and yelled, "Let's get out of here." And there were numerous witnesses at the scene, including tenants who lived in the upstairs apartments. They were so startled by the sudden gunfire that they poked their heads out of the windows. In the confusion, they tried to write down the license plate number of the getaway car. At 3 a.m. the next morning, the police found the abandoned car in a remote corner. The car was parked alone, its bodywork covered with collision marks, as if telling the story of the previous day's crime. A few days later, several police officers were on duty on the highway. The trees on both sides of the highway were shivering in the cold wind, and yellow leaves were falling in the wind. Biegenwald and Sparnroft were speeding like a bolt of lightning, exceeding the maximum speed allowed on the highway. The police were immediately alerted and gave chase, eventually pulling them over for speeding. However, a panicked Biegenwald, mistakenly believing his identity had been compromised, shot one of the officers before speeding off in a panic. Fortunately, the wounded officer remembered their faces and the model of their car and reported them to the police. Later, a state trooper heard the news on the radio, and he was extra vigilant on patrol. Most of the stores on the street had their doors closed, and the streetlights shed a dim light. When he recognized the car, he didn't hesitate to pull it over. The alert Biegenwald immediately drew his gun and fired, but missed this time. The state trooper fired back, and Biegenwald was hit, but he still attempted to refire. But the state trooper was a fast runner, and he immediately ran up to Biegenwald and kicked the gun out of his hand. Biegenwald was subsequently arrested, and Sparnroft was taken into custody. Biegenwald was then arrested, and Sparnroft was taken into custody. However, Sparnroft also confessed to all the crimes at trial. In the end, Biegenwald was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Stephen Sladowski, and Sparnroft was sentenced to 25 to 30 years. Biegenwald was then incarcerated at Trenton State Penitentiary, where the walls stood as an impenetrable barrier. He first worked in the prison's machine shop for 5 years. Due to good behavior, he was assigned to the printing press. After a few years, it was transferred to Rahway State Prison, where he worked as a dental lab assistant and also made several dentures. A year later, Biegenwald's parole hearing was denied, but a few months later his application for parole was approved. A member of the parole board estimated that by the time Biegenwald was released, the state had spent more than $250,000 on his care and detention. To alleviate the financial burden, they approved the parole application. On June 12, 1975, Biegenwald was released from prison after nearly 17 years of incarceration. When Biegenwald returned to his normal life, he realized that he had been abandoned by the world. Looking around, he could only find part-time jobs that paid a pittance. It's no wonder that, with the invisible danger label attached to his time in prison, no one was willing to take a chance on him and offer him a secure full-time job. So he had to go back and forth between several local stores and factories like a busy but tired ant. Every day he labored hard, but he could barely make ends meet. On an ordinary day, Biegenwald was walking out of his mother's house after a simple meal. At that moment, a beautiful sight caught his eye. A beautiful young girl in the neighborhood, Diane Mersels, whose hair was covered in a golden veil, as if by the sunlight. Her eyes were like clear lakes, sparkling with youthful light. Biegenwald was instantly captivated by her youthful beauty, as if a string had been gently plucked in his heart. From then on, he began a passionate pursuit. Biegenwald is not an ordinary person. He has been to prison, hands stained with blood. The experience of killing people has given him an incomparably strong psychological quality. Diane, on the other hand, is a recent high school graduate, and like a delicate flower, she has not yet had the chance to see the vastness of the world. In her world, she has hardly met anyone who is particularly outstanding. The pursuit of this bad guy with a few hints of mystery and danger swept through her heart in an instant like a sudden storm. Soon they are quietly in love, and the flames of love burn so swiftly that in a very short time they are engaged to be married. However, when Diane's parents stumbled upon the realization that their precious daughter was engaged to a criminal more than twice her age, their hearts sank instantly. Anxious as ants on a hot plate, they try to persuade Diane by telling her the truth about Biegenwald, that he is a murderer, a thief, a robber, and even an arsonist. They try to wake up their love-struck daughter with these harsh facts, but Diane, as if possessed, doesn't change her mind. Even when she learned of Biegenwald's past, And even when Biegenwald was being held in the Brooklyn Detention Center on rape charges, she was determined to marry Biegenwald in the center. This decision came as a shock to Diane's parents, who were devastated. They couldn't imagine their daughter making such a crazy decision. Although the rape victim did not recognize Biegenwald at the police station, he was forced to serve another 6 months for violating his parole agreement by failing to report his location and information to his parole officer after his release. It was a long, hard 6 months, but finally, Biegenwald was released. He and Diane moved into an apartment in Asbury Park, New Jersey. In this new and unfamiliar environment, they began a new life. Meanwhile, Biegenwald meets up with his friend from prison, Darren Fitzgerald. However, Darren is a felon who met Biegenwald in prison. Born in October 1935 and raised on Long Island, New York, he had joined the United States Navy and served as a paratrooper. His criminal record includes arrests for assault with a knife in 1952, incarceration at Sing Sing and Attica prisons for attempted burglary from 1963 to 1965, and the robbery of a housing project in Camden, New Jersey in 1966, where he held police officers and other hostages hostage. So they worked together like a ticking time bomb that could trigger new crimes at any time. Then a victim emerged, and around that victim, the police then unearthed a series of shocking secrets that unraveled a story of guilt and darkness. On August 27, 1982, a seemingly normal Friday night, 18-year-old Anna Alesevich and her friend Denise Hunter traveled to the lively Asbury Park boardwalk in New Jersey. They took a seat across the street from the famous Stone Pony Club and listened to the music coming out of the bar. The music was at times so intense and at other times so melodic that it seemed to penetrate the soul. But who would have thought that when Denise left briefly to go to the restroom, she would return to find Anna gone, who lives in Camden, New Jersey with her father. She is a lively and cheerful girl with long, beautiful hair and big, bright eyes. No one expected to find her again as a cold corpse. Her body was found behind a restaurant in Ocean Township, just north of Asbury Park. It was dark, damp, and smelled pungent, and Anna had been shot 4 times in the head, the wounds so horrific that the blood had coagulated. Her clothes were neat and tidy, and there was no sign of rape at all, which made the police even more puzzled as to what kind of hatred had made the killer kill the young girl so brutally. After hearing about the murder, Smith, a 21-year-old jewelry saleswoman, reported Biegenwald to the police as a suspect in the murder. Smith was Diane's friend, so she also came into contact with Biegenwald. But in reality, Smith was no good. She was more like an accomplice of Biegenwald. Because Smith is a very weak person in life, she is always being bullied. She approached Biegenwald for help, hoping to be toughened up. However, Biegenwald gives her the horrible idea of killing her coworkers as a way to prove that she is tough. Surprisingly, although she doesn't end up doing it, it's a well-thought-out decision on her part. And at first, she even agrees with the suggestion, thinking it's a good way to get rid of her weakness. In the information Smith provided to police, she said that Biegenwald had once shown her the body of a young woman hiding in a garage and had given her a ring, saying it was a gift that belonged to the victim. Then some sources told police that Biegenwald's house was like an arsenal. It was filled with weapons of all kinds, including handguns, rifles, shotguns, a machine gun, and even a couple of pipe bombs. What is even more distressing is that some of the men admit that they themselves did not have the courage to stand up for their victims when they could have been saved. Either out of fear or selfishness, they chose to remain silent and let the evil continue to spread. On January 22nd, police surrounded Biegenwald's home, where Duran also lived. The officers carefully deployed themselves to capture the suspects in one fell swoop. They skillfully lured Biegenwald out of the house, and as he stepped off the back porch, he was instantly caught by the officers. Biegenwald looked stunned, as if he had not yet realized what had happened. Darren, seeing the chaos outside, panicked and ducked into a secret room with several weapons. The room was so cleverly hidden that it would have been difficult for anyone to find it. But the police soon found the room, and after sternly threatening to shoot through the walls, Duran had no choice but to surrender. However, while searching the house, the police were shocked as they found a large amount of weapons and drugs. There were several pipe bombs, which were frightening to look at. handguns, rifles, shotguns, a machine gun, and a variety of weapons that sent shivers down the spine. And rohypnol, chlorohydrate, marijuana, live puffers, drug collection devices, and floor plans of several prominent area homes and businesses. All of these things make one wonder just what horrors Biegenwald was planning. While in custody, Duren began to recount Biegenwald's criminal behavior in an effort to reduce his sentence. He said that Biegenwald had shown him the body of a young woman in his garage, that she had been killed for business reasons, and that her body had been dumped in a remote wooded area. The area is so thickly wooded that few people go there, but the story is far from over. Duren also reveals that he helped bury another victim at Biegenwald's mother's home. While digging the grave, he was surprised to find another female victim that Biegenwald had buried there some time ago. As the investigation progressed, the police found an additional victim, William Ward, a prison escapee and friend of Biegenwald. But it became clear that the friendship was short-lived, as Biegenwald shot Ward 4 or 5 times in the head and then brutally dumped his body in a nearby cemetery. Eventually, Biegenwald was indicted by New Jersey authorities on 5 counts of first-degree murder. Duren turned the facts of the crime into evidence, pleading guilty to possession of a weapon, hindering Biegenwald's arrest, and helping to bury the body, and receiving 5 years in prison for each count. Biegenwald was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the murder of Anna Alisevich and to death by lethal injection for the murder of William Ward. Biegenwald was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the murder of Anna Alisevich and to life imprisonment for the murder of William Ward. There were 2 other murders that Biegenwald was not charged with, but which are still suspected to have been committed by him. One involved John Petrone, an ex-convict who sometimes acted as a police informant, and John was found dead in a remote New Jersey wildlife refuge with his jawbone, eerily enough, removed. The victim in another case was 17-year-old Virginia Clayton, who on September 8, 1982, was kidnapped and brutally murdered. Her body was found 3 days later, just 4 miles from where John was buried. Excluding these 2 victims are the previously mentioned Stephen Sladowski, Anna Alisevich, and William Ward. The second victim in chronological order is Maria Chalella, also 17 years old. Born on September 27, 1964, to Armando Salella and Mary Nosti, a devoutly religious family, Maria was an outgoing girl who loved sports and often went to concerts with her friend Lily Murray. Her favorite bands were the Grateful Dead and Dan Fogelberg, so when Maria graduated from high school, she wanted to attend South Carolina State College to study music. However, fate took a terrible turn on Halloween night. On that day, Maria asked her mother for $1 before she left the house, but her mother only had a $10 bill, so she told her to ask her father. When Maria left the house, her father told her to come home early. Little did he know that would be the last time he would see his daughter alive. It was 6:30 p.m., a little chilly, when 17-year-old Maria, dressed in a white fur jacket, beige pants, a denim undershirt, tinted glasses, and moccasins, left her home in search of a Halloween party at the beach. 2 years later, her body was found mutilated and buried in the yard of one of her mother's dilapidated homes in Biegenwald. Next came Deborah Osborne, also 17 years old. On April 8, 1982, Deborah Osborne disappeared from a bar in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. Her body was later found buried next to that of Maria. Then there was Betsy Bacon, also 17 years old, born in 1964 to Suzanne Saunders Bacon. On November 20th, 1982, at 11 p.m., Betsy told her mother that she was going to a store on Route 71 to buy cigarettes. However, she never returned. She was also brutally murdered by Biegenwald. Eventually, on March 10, 2008, Biegenwald died. According to the autopsy report, he died of respiratory and kidney failure. It was an extremely painful death, and one that was well deserved by a man who had committed so many brutal crimes. Perhaps in the last moments of his life, he also felt remorse for what he had done. But no matter what, the pain he caused to the families of his victims by his criminal behavior can never be erased. Those young lives, which should have had a bright future, were lost forever because of his cruelty.